So now that I've taken a moment to compose my scene with my camera, I've created a sphere and added a rigid body component to my sphere object, I have the basic setup for a simple simulation. Now, I'm going to tinker around with this a little bit more. I do want to point out that there are a few things that I've made sure to do. I was very conscious of the fact that when I created an object, and I'll just create a cube, this cube that I just created is created roughly at the center of the viewport. So the direction that my screen is composed in that I'm looking, and because I've kind of moved my camera around, I'll say object create cube. You can see that these objects are being created in a different space each time I move relative to my scene viewport. Okay, so I'm just going to delete the first or the second cube that I created. I'm going to highlight the other cube that I created. And so as I'm creating this content and it's kind of, occupying a different place in space, I want this cube to exist at the center of my scene. And I know that the center of my scene is 0 along the X, 0 along the Y, and 0 along the Z. Now I have a couple of different ways to get this object to get to the 0 spot, or the 0 space. And the easiest way is just to highlight the X position. I'll type 0. I'll hit tab, type 0, tab 0. That centers the object to the center of the world. Now I'm just going to move this kind of off to a random spot. Another way that we can do this is that we can go to the little component drop-down menu, this little cog over here, and we can choose to reset. Now when we reset, it resets all of those components. So the position, the scale, and the rotation. So just to demonstrate that, if I change its position and I change its scale and its rotation, so this is been modified, it's pointing in a different direction, it's in a different space. If I go up here and I say reset, it resets all of the components back to the default. Okay, so if I want to keep my scale and I want to keep the rotation, but I just want the position to go back to the center of my universe here, if I go to this cog, I might not go to reset, but I might simply reset position or reset rotation or scale. I'll just reset the position. Okay, now I'll actually reset this object back to its default and I'll lift it up a little bit. Now when I created my sphere, I had a pretty good sense that it was more or less in the center of my space. And if I select my sphere and I look at it, it's more or less at the center. It's pretty close. The X position's a little off and the Z position is a little off. So if I just zero out the X and the Z, it's lined up right on top of this cube. Now its Y is different. It's much bigger. It's higher. It's up in the air. And that was by design. I want this thing to fall through space. So now if I hit play, I know that that other cube is right below it. So you can see it's interacting with the cube. Okay, so I'm going to take that cube that I've created and I'm just going to use that cube and I'm going to scale it up just a little bit. Maybe I'll take the X and set it to 4. I'm going to take the Y value way down to something like 0.1 or 0.2. I'll take the Z value and maybe I'll change that a little bit. So you can see here, I'll just zoom in, tap the F key for frame, and you can see that I've kind of made more of a plane out of this thing. Okay, now I'll zoom back out so I get a sense of where I'm at. I'm going to lift this straight up according to just that one axis. Okay, just the Y axis, and I'll orbit a little bit. And I'm going to rotate this, in this case, along the X, Z, the blue axis is what I wanted to do. I'll just rotate that along the Z axis, just to kind of create a little ramp. Okay, I'll back that up just a little bit, and now when I hit the play button, we'll see that fall and kind of move towards the ramp. Now it's going to roll off the side, but you can see gravity is taking over in that physics simulation. So I'm just going to use this kind of as a ramp. I'll move this up and over. I'm restricting its motion just to one axis. And now I'm going to duplicate, or I'll copy this. And I could edit, copy, and edit, paste, or I could Command C and Command V. And when I do that, you'll notice that I get a cube copy. It's cube parenthesis 1. Now, I should have named my original cube before I copied it. I should have given it a more appropriate name like ramp. okay, which I'll go back and I'll rename these. I'll call this first one ramp. I'll call the second one ramp 2. Okay, and I have an exact duplicate. It happens to be occupying the same space. It inherits the same rotation values and everything. So I'm just going to go find the rotation of Z, and instead of rotating it -27, I'm just going to rotate it +27. You can see now it kind of points back in the opposite direction. And I'll just arrange these ramps like so that they're kind of, sending the sphere back and forth. So just created a real simple little gravity simulation. Okay, and now that sphere kind of rolls off into nowhere. So I have this real basic simulation set up. I want to add one more component to this. I have these real simple ramps, but what happens if I create another cube? And this cube, I'm going to make it much taller. So maybe I'll take the Y and I'll bump it up to 2. And I'll take the X value. Okay, the X is going to be the red axis here. I'll take the X value and I'll take that down maybe to like a 0.2. So I have a scale of 0.2, Y of 2, and Z of 1. And that kind of sets up almost like this little domino type thing here. And you can see that it's kind of floating off the ground for now, and I'll move that down a little bit closer, but I'll be sure to make sure that it does not intersect with the ground. And when I hit the play button, we may be able to anticipate what's going to happen here. That object keeps the sphere from moving beyond it. And that is because by default, whenever we create some basic 3D game objects in Unity, these basic game objects have a box collider. And the box collider, or collider, in the case of the cube, it's a box collider. And that is actually the thing that the sphere is interacting with. It's colliding with that box collider of that object. Now, we can do the same thing to this cube. I'm going to call this, instead of cube, I'll call this domino. And we can do the same thing that we did with the sphere, which is we can add a rigid body to it. So I'll go to Components, Physics, Rigid Body. Now remember, I have the domino selected. I'll say Components, Physics, Rigid Body. Now I can see that I have a rigid body assigned to my domino object. Now when I hit the play button, the domino falls to the ground. It's standing up, and now when the sphere hits it, you guessed it, we knocked it over. Okay? So I now have this domino object that has a rigid body on it. I'm going to copy and paste, or I'm going to right click and choose to duplicate. If I go up under Edit, I believe there's duplicate. Yep, there it is. And the quick key command for duplicate is Command D. So I'll just Command D to duplicate, and I'll move this over a little bit. Command D to duplicate again. And I'll just duplicate a couple of these and hit the play button to see what I get. Okay, we've got a little basic domino set up here. So experiment with some of these concepts using some basic 3D geometry to create some obstacles for the sphere to fall down. Create some simple 3D game objects for the sphere to interact with. Okay, so maybe we'll create not a capsule, but maybe another sphere. And this sphere we'll just kind of place down here and go to Components, Physics, Rigid Body, and let's hit the play button and see what we get here. So we have another sphere inside the environment. Okay, so I got something else, another component that I've added here. Experiment with those objects. In the next presentation, we'll come back and we'll make a pass. We'll create some basic materials to update the aesthetics or the design of this project. So we'll create some basic color materials so that we get a little bit more contrast in our scene, but we'll do that in the next presentation.